Rain lashed the windshield like needles. Detective Elijah Crane narrowed his eyes through the haze, the streetlights flickering like dying stars. The city had never looked darker, or more familiar. He pulled his coat tighter, stepped out of the unmarked Crown Vic, and stared at the apartment complex ahead. Unit 6B. Another body. Another crime scene. But this time, something felt different. They always said Elijah had a gift, an instinct, a sixth sense for catching killers. Some called it talent. Others whispered it was something else. No one knew the real truth. And Elijah had buried that truth so deep, he almost forgot it himself. Until tonight. The elevator groaned as it climbed. The lights flickered, of course they did. Elijah kept his hand near his sidearm. You never knew when a killer might revisit the scene. The door to 6B hung half open. Inside, the room reeked of copper and stale cigarettes. Forensics was already there, dusting, swabbing, taking photos. But none of them had seen the message. Only Elijah saw it. Written in smeared blood on the cracked mirror above the dresser. I know what you did in 1997. Elijah's breath hitched. His heart stuttered once, then pounded like a drumline. He looked around. No one else was reacting to the writing. Hey, he said, trying to sound casual, any of you see this message? The tech looked up. What message, detective? Elijah stared back at the mirror. It was clean. Reality is a fragile thing. Sometimes it shifts when no one's looking. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't even drive home. Instead, he went to the only place that made sense, the archives. The cold, buzzing, forgotten floor of the precinct building. There, under decades of dust and silence, were the files nobody wanted to touch. 1997. He found it. The old case. Sharon Lennox. Age 17. Missing. Presumed dead. The official story said she vanished walking home from school. The real story. Elijah had been there that day. He was just a rookie, just a scared kid with a badge. And Sharon had known something about him. Something she wasn't supposed to say. He had never told anyone. So who wrote that message? And how did they know? The next murder happened 2 days later. Another cryptic message. This time carved into the victim's chest. One by one, we dig them up. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a countdown. Elijah knew then, this killer wasn't just targeting strangers. They were leaving messages for him. And worse, they were digging up a past he had fought to bury. He started sleeping in his office, the TV on mute, an old revolver by his side. The faces of his past blurred with those in front of him. Guilt had a shape now. It was wearing gloves and holding a knife. Some secrets don't stay buried. They dig their way out, using someone else's hands. One night, he received a call. No name. Just static. And then a voice, distorted but calm. She screamed your name before she died, Elijah. You remember that, don't you? He dropped the phone. His hands shook. No one should have known that. Not even the coroner. Elijah had told him she died instantly. The tape from that night had mysteriously gone missing. No one had heard her last words. Except him. And now, the killer. A week passed. Another victim. This one left at Elijah's old childhood home, abandoned for years. The walls were covered in pages torn from Sharon Lennox's diary. One entry was circled in red ink, again and again. He said not to tell anyone. But secrets are heavy. If I disappear, he did it. Elijah fell to his knees. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't killed her. But he hadn't stopped what happened, either. Then came the twist Elijah couldn't explain. Security footage from the latest murder showed something impossible. The killer looked like him. Not similar. Not vaguely resembles. It was Elijah. Same scar. Same eyes. Same coat. He played the footage back 6 times. At minute 132, the figure turned to the camera, smiled slightly, and held up a finger to its lips. Sure. Elijah backed away from the screen. His reflection in the monitor stared back. His heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Was it a trick? Deep fake? Or something else? He no longer trusted what he saw. And worse, he no longer trusted what he remembered. The scariest monsters are the ones who wear your face. Then came the package. A plain manila envelope slid under his door. Inside, a black and white photo of Sharon Lennox, eyes closed, bruises visible. It was dated a full 3 days after the day she was declared missing. On the back, written in that same red ink, "She told the truth, and you punished her for it." Elijah screamed. He punched the wall so hard his knuckles split. Blood dripped to the floor. And beneath it, another message was forming. Not written. Etched. Like the wall itself had been waiting to speak. He's not just a killer. He's a mirror. Elijah wasn't sure what scared him more, the idea that someone had been watching him all these years, or that he had become the very thing he spent his life hunting. He poured a glass of scotch, hands trembling. The ice cracked. In the reflection of the liquor, he saw movement behind him, but when he turned, nothing was there. Just shadows. And breathing. This isn't just about solving a murder. This is about solving yourself. That night, Elijah left a recorder running in his room. Just to be safe. When he played it back the next morning, there was 6 hours of silence. Then, at 3:14 a.m., a voice spoke directly into the mic. "You can lie to everyone else, Elijah. But I know what you did." Click. And now he's running out of time. Out of clues. And out of people he can trust. Because if the killer is someone who knows his secret, if the killer wears his face, then the next body might not be a stranger. It might be him. The city never really sleeps. But for Elijah Crane, it had begun to whisper. Whispers in alleyways. Whispers in vents. Whispers that said his name. That breathed long-forgotten truths through the cracks of reality. He stood in front of an old psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of the city, abandoned, crumbling, mostly erased from official maps. But it was real. He remembered this place from before the badge, before the lies. A tip led him here. The envelope with Sharon's photo had included coordinates. A small note attached. "You buried the truth in concrete. Let's dig it out." Inside, the air was dense with mildew and decay. Every step echoed like footsteps behind him. The power was long dead. The hallways were a graveyard of records and rusted wheelchairs. But Elijah's flashlight caught something that stopped him cold. A door. Unmarked, bolted from the outside. Behind it, silence. He forced it open. Inside, he found a single table, a chair, and hundreds of cassette tapes. Labeled in red pen, with only numbers and dates. And one stood out. Tape 17, EL, March 7, 1997. His initials. His birth date. His hands shook as he placed it in the dusty player beside the chair. A click. A hiss. Then a girl's voice. "You said I'd be safe. You said you'd come back. Why didn't you come back, Elijah?" Sharon. His legs went weak. She sounded terrified. Like she knew she was being recorded against her will. Then, another voice joined hers. A man's voice. Controlled. "Tell me again what he told you. What he's afraid they'll find." Elijah recognized the voice. He hadn't heard it in years. But he had dreamed of it. Detective Malcolm Rourke. His former mentor. Dead 10 years. Officially. Rourke had trained him. Had molded him. But Rourke also had secrets. Rumors swirled about his connections to off-record interrogations, black sites, unsanctioned cleanups. And now it sounded like Rourke had been the one who silenced Sharon Lennox. But why use Elijah's name? Why make it look like he had something to hide? Unless Elijah wasn't just a bystander. Unless he had been part of something, and had chosen to forget. He staggered out of the hospital as dawn cracked the horizon. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more distinct. This time they said, "You forgot on purpose. We remember for you." The next crime scene was unlike the others. Not a body. A disappearance. Lieutenant Carson, Elijah's partner for 3 years, vanished from his apartment. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. But on his pillow, a note in blood. He asked questions. That was his only crime. And under it, an old photograph of Elijah and Carson, arms slung over each other, in front of a chalkboard. Elijah stared. The background of the photo wasn't from any place he remembered. Then he saw the blackboard behind them. It had a crude diagram. Not of a murder scene. Not a case file. But of his mind. A psychological breakdown. Sections labeled repression, trigger memory, moral compromise. Elijah spiraled. If someone had messed with his memories, what else did he not know? Had Sharon really died that night? Had he helped Rourke do it? Or worse, had he watched? He dug deeper. Through sealed files, stolen recordings, and off-the-record interviews. One phrase kept reappearing. The mirror room. He found it referenced in only one place, a sealed file buried inside a Homeland Security archive, marked classified, Perception OPS, 1996 to 1999. Most names were redacted. But one line was left untouched. Subject EL, 47 responded negatively to simulated self-confrontation. Triggered disassociation. Memory split successful. Subject EL. Elijah Crane. He knew where he had to go next. The mirror room wasn't a metaphor. It was real. A government program, experimental psychology, fringe science. Designed to study trauma. To break people, study how they repaired themselves. He had been one of their subjects. And Sharon had been a witness. Maybe even a fellow subject. That's why she died. That's why someone was now making Elijah relive every moment. Not just to expose him, but to reawaken something in him. He visited the last living doctor linked to the program. A man named Harland Ridge. Retired. Dying of emphysema. Living in a trailer in the woods. Ridge opened the door, saw Elijah, and didn't blink. "You're the one they couldn't erase," he said. "What did they do to me?" Elijah whispered. Ridge sighed, stepped aside. Inside his trailer were stacks of VHS tapes. File folders. Old newspaper clippings. One board held photos of every victim Elijah had seen in this case. "I don't know if you're the killer, detective," Ridge said. "But I know they used you to make one. When truth is a weapon, memory is a battlefield." Before Elijah could respond, a gunshot shattered the window. Harland Ridge fell backward, a red bloom spreading from his chest. Elijah ducked, rolled out the back door, firing blindly into the trees. But there was no one there. Only another cassette, lying in the mud, labeled, "The Day You Became Someone Else." Rain again. It always seemed to rain when someone died. This time, it was Harland Ridge, the last man who might have told Elijah what really happened to him. But now the old doctor was dead. And in Elijah's pocket, still slick with mud, was the tape labeled, "The Day You Became Someone Else." He didn't dare play it right away. Not in the car. Not with his hands still shaking. He waited until he was back in the archive basement, the only place he still trusted. He fed the cassette into the player, hit record on a backup device, and sat completely still. A hiss. Then static. Then a voice. Not Sharon, not Rourke. His own. The tape played out like a confession. Not to the police. Not to God. To himself. A younger Elijah. From before the badge. Barely 20. Broken. Panicked. "I didn't mean to do it. But they said I had to. They said she saw too much. That if she told anyone what happened in the room, the whole program would collapse. I didn't kill her. Not with my hands. But I let it happen. I told them where she was hiding. They promised I'd forget. That the guilt would dissolve. That I'd be someone new. Elijah hit pause. His breath rattled. It had been real. All of it. He wasn't just chasing a killer. He was chasing a version of himself he never wanted to believe existed. And someone, whoever this mirror-faced killer was, had found these tapes first. They were using Elijah's buried truths as breadcrumbs. The next lead came through an encrypted email. No sender. Just a subject line. The tape you didn't destroy. Inside, a location. A cemetery. Midnight. No context. No explanation. But Elijah went anyway. Because he was past fear now. He needed to know. The address led him to the Lennox family plot. Sharon's name was etched in stone, though no body had ever been found. There was a tape recorder sitting on top of the grave. Elijah hit play. Sharon's voice. You were kind at first. Then they changed you. They hollowed you. Said the mirror test didn't work on the others. That you were special. You cried after they made me scream. I remember that. Somewhere in there, you were still you. But they took that version of you away. And now someone else wears your face. He dropped the recorder like it was burning him. That's when the figure appeared. Tall, still, masked in black. Watching him from 10 feet away. Elijah drew his weapon. Don't move. The figure didn't flinch. Didn't speak. It raised one gloved hand and pointed behind him. Elijah spun around. Nothing. He turned back. The figure was gone. But where it had stood was a small package. Wrapped in plastic. Inside, a burner phone. A photo of Rourke, alive, recent, standing in front of a government building in D.C. And a simple typed message. You've been hunting the wrong man. The real one is still waiting for you. Room 217. Every story has a beginning. Yours never ended. Elijah had a choice. Go to D.C., confront the man who built him, or keep chasing the mirror-faced killer who had now killed 3, possibly 4 people tied to the case. He didn't choose. Because both chose him first. The phone in the package rang. He answered. A deep, controlled voice spoke. Welcome back to the program, Agent EL, 47. Your memory cycle has reached stage 4. Final confrontation in progress. Proceed with caution. It was the same voice he heard in dreams. The voice that had trained him to forget. The voice that had once erased everything. His knees gave out. He hit the concrete floor of the archives. They were still running the program. He began cross-referencing every location in the tapes. They weren't random crime scenes. They formed a pattern, a map, encoded in trauma. Each location linked to something called perception sync points. Abandoned warehouses, psychiatric sites, archive vaults, and all of them tied to room 217, which wasn't in D.C. It was under the city, beneath a mental health institute long shut down. According to one buried file, room 217 was the core of Project Oubliette, the place where they tested moral splitting, where they broke people so they could be remade. He descended alone. Into rusted stairwells. Powerless halls. His flashlight flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows. Room 215. Room 216. Then, Room 217. No door. Just a scorched black outline where a door once was. He stepped through. The walls were mirrored. Floor to ceiling. Cracked. Covered in peeling quotes. One, in bold black letters. To kill the monster, you must remember being it. And in the center of the room, a chair. Strapped to it. Detective Carson. Alive. Barely. Eyes wide. Mouth taped. Carved into his chest. Choose. Him, or the truth. Then, movement behind the mirrors. The mirror-faced killer stepped forward, one hand on the switch to flood the room with gas. In the other hand, a lighter. And in their voice, familiar. Too familiar. They spoke. "You still think you're not the one who started this?" The gas hissed softly into the mirrored room. Elijah didn't move. Couldn't. Because across from him, strapped to the chair, was his former partner, Detective Carson, his eyes screaming what his mouth couldn't. Behind them, the mirror-faced figure held the lighter an inch above the floor. All it would take was one flick. "You still think you're not the one who started this?" the voice repeated. But this time, Elijah recognized it completely. It was his voice. Not from his throat, but from a recording. The killer had spliced his old confessions from the experimental tapes. They were using his forgotten past to haunt him. "I don't know who you are," Elijah said slowly, hands up. "But I know what this is." The figure tilted its head. "You want revenge. But I didn't choose this. I was made, just like you." The killer's hand wavered over the lighter. Then they said, quietly, "No, Elijah. You made me. We are all someone else's consequence." They stepped forward, pulling off the mask. And the face beneath made Elijah stagger backward. It wasn't Rourke. It wasn't Sharon. It was another Elijah. Not a twin. Not a clone. But a man who looked almost like him, older, haggard, stitched by pain and time. His eyes were dead in that way only the institutionalized ever are. He smiled, thin and bitter. "You don't remember me," he said. "Of course not. You got to move on. I didn't." Elijah's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" "I was subject EL 48. You were 47. I was the backup, the spare, the control variable." "You were my shadow," Elijah whispered. "Yes," EL 48 said. "You got to forget. I got to remember everything. And you know what memory becomes after enough time." He leaned in close. Fire. The gas thickened. Elijah grabbed a steel rod from the floor, swung it through the pipe, sparking metal. The killer flinched and stumbled back. The lighter clattered across the room. Elijah tackled him, himself, his mirror self. They fought violently, smashing into the glass panels, blood and reflections flying in all directions. Carson was choking, writhing in the chair. Elijah broke from the fight, slashed his bindings, and threw him over his shoulder. But as he turned to run, EL 48 laughed. "You still don't get it," he screamed, bleeding from the mouth. "They're still watching. Room 217 was never abandoned. You're still in it." The room went dark. Then a mechanical click. A projector flicked on, illuminating the far wall. Footage of Elijah, from days ago, watching tapes, talking to himself. Interrogating Ridge. Screaming into the void. All of it filmed. All of it orchestrated. He hadn't been investigating a crime. He had been walking a loop. A programmed loop. Carson and Elijah escaped the room. Barely. Smoke trailed them up the stairs. Sirens wailed in the distance. But outside, something was wrong. The city wasn't as he left it. The sky was too bright. The streets, too quiet. No people. No noise. He turned to Carson. Carson was blinking hard, like he didn't recognize anything. "What do you remember?" Elijah asked. Carson shook his head. "I don't know how I got here." And then it hit Elijah. None of this was real. It was the final phase of the program. He wasn't back in the city. He was still in the room. The escape, the fire, the killer, all a simulated delusion. A voice spoke over a PA system, flat, clinical. Subject EL 47 achieved partial memory restoration. Emotional destabilization at 87%. Loop effectiveness, 91%. Preparing for reintegration. The world shimmered, like film melting, and then everything blinked out. Blackness. When Elijah opened his eyes, he was strapped to a medical gurney. Bright lights. People in white coats. Screens all around him showing his past, every moment of his investigation playing like reruns. A man stepped forward, face in shadow. "You did well, detective," he said. "Better than the others." Elijah's voice cracked. "What is this? Why would you do this to me?" "Because memory is a weapon," the man said. "And we needed to see if you could survive your own." He handed Elijah a folder. Marked. Subject EL 47. Clearance approved. Deployable. Deployable? For what? The man leaned in. What's worse than being a killer? Being a tool sharpened by guilt and pointed at someone else. Elijah's memories surged. Not just Sharon. Not just the program. Other operations. Other people he'd taken down. Evidence he'd fabricated. Criminals he'd hunted, who may have been truth-tellers. He wasn't just a detective. He was an erasure agent. And the entire story, the crime, the killer, the clues, had been a test to make sure he was still viable. Still programmable. Still loyal. But then he looked at the mirror across the room. And saw his reflection smile without him moving.